Journey to the East. Chapter 1. My best friend Danny and I crept down a creaking stairway into his cool, damp cellar. Suddenly an intuition flashed through my mind. I should not be here. My heart pounded. In the middle of the room, a barbell holding weights of 250 pounds was propped on steel hooks. My classmate bragged, "My father lifts this every day." I was 7 years old, small and skinny, with short black hair, brown eyes, and a dark complexion. Touching the cold weights, I felt tiny. Danny turned to me. "Richie, I'm going to show you a big secret." Putting his index finger across his lips, he whispered, "Promise you won't tell anyone?" He climbed up a shelf, reached high into a rafter, and came down with a brass key. Then, leading me to a wooden cabinet bigger than we were, he unlocked it and swung open the doors. He pointed to a stack of magazines. "Go ahead," Danny smiled. "Look at one." I did. It was filled with photos of naked women in amorous poses. My little body froze. Never before had I ever seen what was under a girl's clothing. It looked so strange and forbidden. "Neat, huh?" Danny asked. I nodded my head, unsure what to say. Flapping the magazine shut, I shoved it back into the cabinet. "Wait till you see what's in the drawer." He pulled it open, exposing 2 pistols and several hand grenades. "My father always keeps the guns loaded, and the grenades are real." He handed a grenade to me. "Here, hold it." Holding the cold, heavy metal, I shivered. "This is pretty neat," I mumbled, trying to hide my fear. I placed the weapon carefully back in the drawer. "Richie, wait till you see this." Danny pulled open 2 doors inside the cabinet, exposing a sort of altar. There, a framed photograph held a figure whose eyes stared ominously into mine. Horrified, I found myself face to face with Adolf Hitler. 2 armbands embroidered with Nazi swastikas had been draped ceremoniously on either side of the photo, and below hung a dagger with a shining swastika embossed in its handle. My heart sank. Hideous images flashed through my mind. I had often heard my elders speak about the recent slaughter of our relatives at the hands of the Nazis. My grandfather's family had never been heard from since 1941, when the Nazis occupied Lithuania, our ancestral home. Danny whispered, "This is a secret, but my parents hate you." A wave of heat rushed from my stomach to my throat. "Why? Why? What did I do?" "Because you're a Jew. They say you killed Jesus." "What?" I stood paralyzed. What was I hearing? It just didn't make sense. "My father says that even God hates you." The heavy footprints of his parents creaked through the ceiling above us. I didn't know if I should run, hide, or cry. "Do you hate me, Danny?" "No, you're my best friend. Because you're a Jew, I might hate you when I grow up, but I hope not." My mind went blank. Locking the cabinet, Danny led me upstairs to the kitchen table where his mother was waiting, with 2 plates of vanilla cookies and 2 glasses of cold milk. She smiled tightly. A loud creak on the floor announced the entrance of Danny's father. a stocky man with a square jaw, graying crew cut, small piercing eyes, and a half smile that gave me the chills. I felt utterly vulnerable in his presence. Could the cookies be poisoned, I thought? But what could I do? I was afraid not to eat. "Eat, Richie, what's wrong?" his mother challenged. I struggled to hide my misery as I ate the cookies. With each bite, I prayed to God to protect me. Pale as a ghost, I walked home. At that age, I had little power to reason. I was simply hurt, and badly. My mother greeted me with a gentle smile. She was standing in the kitchen with an apron around her waist, rolling out dough across our circular dining table. "I'm making apple strudel for you, Richie, your favorite." "Mom," I asked, "does God hate me?" "No, of course not. God loves you." Her eyebrows tensed as she placed her rolling pin on the table. "Why do you ask this question?" I was afraid to tell her. "I don't know. I guess I'm just curious." To avoid any further questions, I ran upstairs to my bedroom. I believed my mother. I believed that God loved me. Lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I struggled to come to grasp the contradiction of love and hate, both connected to the same God. In the innocence of childhood, I secretly prayed in my thoughts or in a whisper. I'd mostly pray in bed until I fell asleep. When I prayed, I felt a sense of shelter and that someone was listening to me. I believed God heard me and was with me. Still, I had many questions about this divine being. Who is this being called God? I often wondered. Is he like an enormous cloud or a shadow nearly invisible? Or is he a friend who hears my every prayer, so real that I can almost touch him with my thoughts? My parents, Gerald and Idelle Slavin, were not particularly religious in a formal sense. Rather, they expressed their faith in God through their gratitude, generosity, kindness, and dedication to the family. They had grown up during the Depression, and ever since their childhoods had worked hard to support their families. While they wanted the best for their children, they were also careful not to spoil us, encouraging thankfulness for all we had and were given. In 1955, when I was 4, they had moved us from Chicago to the village of Sherwood Forest in Highland Park, Illinois, so they could raise my 2 brothers and me in an environment free from the pollution and dangers of the big city. Our tranquil neighborhood was set on flat terrain with abundant grass and trees. Children played in the empty lots, and the quiet streets lined with houses were almost identical to each other. "Our little Richie is sweet, but so strange," my parents would often say. "Why is he like this?" I had odd habits. No one had any idea where they came from. Until I was 8 or 9 years old, I refused to sit in chairs while eating and preferred to sit on the floor, which my parents forbade. As a compromise, I was allowed to stand at the dinner table. Even in restaurants, it was a common occurrence for waitresses to ask if they could bring me a chair. "He doesn't believe in chairs," my mother would reply with a shrug of her shoulders. While my parents took great care with their appearance, always dressing neatly and well, my mother had to wash my new clothes again and again until they looked old, before I agreed to wear them. When they bought me new shoes, I scraped them with rocks till they looked worn. Whenever my parents had a new car, I squeezed onto the floor of the back seat until the car wasn't new anymore. Having better things than others made me feel embarrassed. I idolized the poor and downtrodden. Once, my father took the family to dinner at the local country club. I disrupted everything by suddenly rushing from the table and out the door because I couldn't bear to be served by the busboy, who was a classmate of mine. When my grandpa Bill found me sitting alone in our car, I explained my feelings. "It's all right, little Richie," he said. "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." My father's father, William Bill Slavin, left a deep impression on my life. His loving nature reflected the deep-rooted belief he had in his religion. I was fascinated to observe the quiet, unassuming way he tried to harmonize his old-world traditions with life in America. Often, I'd catch him praying softly to himself at family mealtimes as the rest of us went about eating all around him. When I reached the age to enter Hebrew school, my father could not afford to send me. Still, he strived to give me the best he could. When I turned 13, he approached Rabbi Lippis to ask for a simple bar mitzvah to bless me. The stately silver-haired rabbi readily tutored me in the basic prayers, free of charge. One day I asked him, "Rabbi, could you explain to me the meaning of these prayers?" Tears welled in his soft brown eyes, and he embraced me with an affection I will never forget. In his old-world Yiddish accent, his voice cracked with emotion. He told me, "Little Richie, I'm satisfied with your sincerity to understand the meaning of this ceremony. It is becoming rare. Rabbi, how should I pray?" A wide grin expanded across his square, slightly wrinkled face. I felt sheltered by his affection, something I believed every child needed. "In the Talmud," he said, "a book on Jewish law written by rabbis thousands of years ago, it is taught that it is better to pray to God for the strength to overcome temptations, difficulties, and doubts in order to do His will, rather than to pray for Him to do our will." On my 13th birthday, my older brother Marty gave me the debut record album of Peter, Paul, and Mary, the folk trio from Greenwich Village. Their songs protested war, prejudice, and social injustices. But it was the lyrics referring to God that most stirred my soul. Leaning back to listen, I would close my eyes, drawn like a magnet to every word. The album's opening song began. "Early in the morning, about the break of day, I asked the Lord to help me find my way." Again and again I listened, unaware that this simple prayer would guide the coming years of my life. In my quest for meaning, folk musicians like Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan spurred the rebellion erupting within me. But if folk music left me spellbound with meaningful lyrics, the blues struck my heart with raw emotion. The blues is all about feeling and yearning, pouring the grief of your heart into every note played or word sung, discovering relief and joy in that expression. listening to a blues singer cry for a lost love. I would cry along for my lost love, though I didn't know yet who this was. While I was introspective, shy, and often worried about the feelings of others, my older brother Marty had a sixth sense for how to rile people. Wild like a monkey, he was called Monk for short. In 1965, when I was 14, I entered Deerfield High School, where Monk had just graduated. Seeing me, some teachers gasped, "Oh no, another Monk?" For my first day of school, I was labeled Little Monk. The name stuck, although the irony of it escaped me until many years later. As a freshman, I was promoted to the varsity wrestling team. I cannot say that I was highly skilled, but when I applied my mind to something, it was with intense absorption. The coach and teammates had great hope that in the coming years, I could be a champion. At first, I loved the challenge. Scholarships were mine if I pursued them. But something strange was happening to me. I had begun to crave a purpose in life beyond wealth, prestige, and the fads of society. How could I be content in the idyllic land of Highland Park when I knew that African Americans were imprisoned like slaves in the ghettos just miles away? How could I be satisfied with a wrestling medal when my older friends were being forced into the horrors of the Vietnam War? Haunted by such questions, I, along with my friends, questioned the very fabric of the life we knew. On a hunt for purpose, I burned with a passion for the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King Jr., poring over the words of Malcolm X and books on social reform. Along with my best friends, Bassoon and Gary, whom I'd known since we were 10, I got a job at a car wash after school and worked full-time in the summer. It was hard work, but I loved it. Here we found ourselves working to the backdrop of soul music among older African American men from the ghettos of the South Side of Chicago, a world away from the security of Highland Park. In the company of these men, who were beaten down by poverty, racial discrimination, and alcoholism, hearing the raw cry of a blues or soul singer stirred my heart. I was 15 years old and deeply troubled by unanswered questions. Then, when a close friend, only 16, died after his car skidded on the winter ice and plummeted into the frigid waters of Lake Michigan, I found myself wondering, who am I and where am I going? It seemed that the whole world was skidding on the ice of uncertainty. In search of a sanctuary, I moved down to our basement and covered the walls with psychedelic posters that glowed under a black light. Fishing nets hung from the ceiling. Jasmine incense smoke hovered like a cloud. Sometimes I would swish on the flashing beam of a strobe light to heighten the dreamlike effect. In the privacy of my basement, I listened to the revolutionary music of the 60s. A Day in the Life by the Beatles churned my longing to seek a meaningful life beyond the superficial. When I laid back, closed my eyes, and listened to George Harrison sing "Within You, Without You," I cried with the strings of his sitar for inner peace. Over and over again, I played Ray Charles' soulful rendition of Old Man River as I sat motionless and grieved for the plight of the downtrodden. When I listened to B.B. King, the mournful notes bursting from his guitar pierced my heart, and I wondered why sad songs made me feel so good. One late night, in the turmoil of questioning everything around me, I heard Johnny Rivers through my stereo headphones singing, "Look to your soul for the answer." I took a deep breath, looked up, and exclaimed, "Yes, that's it." Incited by the times, my closest friends and I threw ourselves into the spirit of the counterculture of the 1960s. As the minority in a school where conservatives, jocks, and cheerleaders predominated, we began to wear our hair long, to experiment with marijuana and LSD, and to generally rebel against the values of our parents' generation. But I was torn. I hated to disappoint anyone. I agonized over quitting the wrestling team and did not have the heart to let my coach and teammates down. The school expected me to help lead the team to championships. The coach once declared to the team, "When little Monk is determined to win, he's like a hungry tiger pacing the mat. He's champion material, but he seems to be getting distracted." Confused, I prayed for a way out. Soon after, in a prestigious tournament, I pulled my opponent down in the first 5 seconds of the match. The crowd roared, cheering me on, but I knelt as if paralyzed. My shoulder had been yanked out of its socket, and the bone ripped through the muscles of my chest. Pain stabbed through my body. At that moment, with the dislocation of my shoulder, my life was dislocated from a passion that had already died. Trembling in agony as hundreds in the gymnasium looked on in shock, I silently thanked God. I was free. What I did not have the courage to give up myself had been cast aside, I felt, by the power of destiny. Gary Liss, whose friendship would become a miracle in my life, was friendly, outgoing, and ever restless for the next adventure. Gary was a rebel who truly found himself when he found the counterculture. He and I had traveled to California together during the summer break of my junior year in high school. On the Sunset Strip and on Haight-Ashbury, we reveled in the freedom we found. In these havens for flowered children, we met many beautiful people, idealists like ourselves. As for the more outrageous characters we encountered there, people who seemed to value being destructive, rude, or just hedonistic, we steered clear. In 1969, I attended Miami-Dade College in Florida, along with my close friends from high school, Bassoon, Steve, and Gary. I, like so many in my generation, was young, wild, and hungry for adventure. But it was at this time I first noticed something taking precedent over everything else. A desire for spirituality that burned in my heart. It grew daily. Someone gave me a book entitled The World's Great Religions. I drank in every word and wanted to devour more and more. In further readings of other books, I discovered an ancient Indian technique that taught silent meditation on the sacred syllable Om. Through my inner voyages, I uncovered a subtle reality so rich that I longed to go deeper. One morning I saw a poster on my college campus advertising a lecture on transcendental meditation. Mike, a bearded, long-haired American, spoke on the science of consciousness as taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I was enthralled. Mike invited me to Hollywood, Florida, where with no commitment, I could receive a personal meditation mantra. Once there, I placed a flower, handkerchief, and $35 on an altar where a one-syllable mantra was whispered into my ear. Daily meditation became the most important part of my life. The seed of my spiritual inclination was sprouting rapidly, but along with that seed grew a weed, my aversion to bigotry and fanaticism. In those days, by growing my hair long in protest of the norms of the establishment, I became a target for those who hated hippies, including the police, who used to pull me over, search me, and harass me on a regular basis. The truth was, I felt a sort of sad fulfillment when people hated me for my long hair, minority religion, or for what I believed. I felt it an honor to be persecuted for a noble ideal rather than sell out to popular opinions or fashions. At the same time, I was also beginning to understand that to hate those who hated me was to share the same disease. I longed to break through these sectarian barriers and discover the inner essence of all religions, the oneness of God. While in college, I studied psychology and humanities, but my meditation and music remained priorities. Near the college, in the town of Opelika, was a house called the Ashtray, where the dedicated musician James Harmon lived. Known to us as Jimmy the Bear, he was a stout, long-haired, bearded man and the lead singer and harmonica player for the Burning Water Blues Band. The bear loved me like a little brother. One day, with a proud smile, he slapped one of his harmonicas into my hand. "Brother, I'm going to teach you how to play the harp." "But I don't know music," I responded shyly. "That don't matter, man. Your heart's got deep feeling, and that's what the blues are all about." From that day on, my harmonica became my inseparable partner in life. During this time, I was befriended by some African American students, and through one of them, developed a special friendship with an older woman who had been a close associate of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A gentle but strong-willed woman, she too had dedicated her life to being a civil rights leader. As she was in her late 40s and I was only 18, I called her mother and she called me son. We shared soul-searching discussions about Dr. King's vision and his sad assassination. A devout Baptist, she was kind and gracious, yet fearlessly determined. At one point, she organized a civil rights march through a neighborhood of Miami and invited me to participate. Her face lit up with surprise when I actually showed up. A white boy in a black march in the Deep South. Proudly, she took me by the hand to walk beside her up front. Onlookers were appalled to see me there. White racists threatened and jeered as we passed. Some threw stones or bottles as the police looked the other way. Mother smiled as over 300 marchers sang Sam Cooke's anthem, "A change is gonna come, and we shall overcome." The march culminated in a rally in the park. Here the marchers sat on folding chairs. I sat behind my friend until she stepped up to the microphone under a coconut tree. Denouncing the injustices inflicted on her people, she urged the audience toward an uprising devoid of violence. Her voice thundered with conviction. Violence will degrade us to the evil ways of our persecutors. We must be fearless and stand together and demand our rights, not with weapons and fire, but with integrity and faith in the Almighty God. We must boycott wherever we smell the stench of bigotry. In the face of our oppressors, we must never cower from the truth. Tears filled her eyes, and her voice soared as she echoed her mentor. "This is America, the land of the free. We'll never give up until the chains of slavery are broken forever, and we can shout into the heavens, 'Free at last, free at last.' Reverend King had a dream. He died for his dream. We will live for his dream. Amen." Cheers filled the park. Taking her seat, she whispered in my ear, "Did you like it, son?" I nodded with conviction. Next rose a speaker who screamed out for revolution. All hope for a nonviolent solution terminated when Reverend King was shot dead, he said, his voice full of indignation and rage. "Brothers and sisters, rise from your slumber. We must fight fire with fire. The freedom of this nation was won by war, not peace. We must vow to exterminate our white oppressors and burn their cities." Half the crowd howled in support, while others sighed in shame. Soaked with sweat, the man shook his fist in frenzy. "They plot to keep us forever in the back of their buses and prisoners of the ghettos." Hatred ignited his eyes as he thrust his finger toward me, screaming, "Looky here, brothers and sisters, see this insidious white man. Today in our march, he shamelessly walks in front, leaving us black folk in the back." His supporters roared in fury. The man went on to identify me as the symbol of everything they despised. He thundered on, inciting vengeance and retribution. My friend leapt up to defend me, but her protest was muted by the man's fury as he now controlled the microphone and the majority of the crowd. Gripping me tenderly, she shook her head in dismay. "Son, I'm terribly sorry. I brought you to the front of the march, and God knows that. You trusted me, and now you're in jeopardy." She squeezed my hand and sighed. "You better leave now, and may God be with you." I crept from tree to tree away from the rally. My friend watched carefully, ready to rise and defend me if required. I was struck by the way so many people, even as they are yearning for equality and justice, focused on difference to the point of violence. Still, with a deep breath of relief, I left the park. I realized that my admiration for Dr. King and his followers had been heightened by the day's experience. I felt that faithful to their ideal, they fought oppression relentlessly from without and within. As I walked alone under the Florida sun, I recalled a passage that shed light on the experience. If a person does not have an ideal he's ready to die for, he has nothing really meaningful to live for. Then it came to me. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream he lived and died for, and that dream changed the world. Wasn't that power in all of us if we pursued our calling? I completed 1 year at Miami-Dade. Summer break came, and I found myself standing alone on the edge of a highway in rural Pennsylvania. My thumbs stretched upward, my wavy black hair draped down my back. It was a humid day, and I was headed to New York City to visit a friend. Just 19 years old, only 5'6", and hardly 120 pounds, I felt frail and vulnerable whenever I hitchhiked. 3 hours passed before a rusty '59 Plymouth slammed on its brakes and halted. I ran to the car and expressed my gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you very much, sir." A single middle finger thrust out from the window, and the sweating motorist inside scowled. "Get a job, you useless parasite." He shoved his stocky arm out the window, grabbed a length of my long hair, and jerked my face close to his. The stench of beer and tobacco blasted me. Spitting on the ground, he cursed, "Punk, if I had my shotgun, I'd shoot you dead." He swerved away, tires squealing. I coughed up the black smoke I'd inhaled from his exhaust pipes. Resentment swelled in my chest, but I wrestled to curb it. I was seeking a spiritual life. On roadsides, sometimes I felt like an open target for anyone suffering from anger or negativity. But I hoped all these difficulties might help me to grow. I knew I needed to learn the value of patience, perseverance, and prayer to overcome obstacles. In the summer of 1970, wearing one's hair long was not just a fashion. It was a statement of discontent, an aggressive challenge to the mainstream values driven by money, power, and prejudice. It was a signal of what I believed. My friends and I were living out our beliefs, protesting the war we'd been tear-gassed the year before at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and conservative police often harassed us in our college town. All this simply because we yearned for a meaningful life with ideals we could live and die for. Although in my heart I bore malice toward no one, my appearance invited hateful reactions. Finally, after hours waiting for a ride, a friendly man picked me up and brought me to his home in Gettysburg. There I sat alone in a forest on the bank of a creek. The song of the babbling stream soothed my heart. The flowing waters swirled around both wood and stone. The creek seemed to know a secret that could unfold the mysteries of life. If only, like the running stream, I could follow my calling, I thought. Nature may whisper her secrets and guide me to my destiny. Days later, after I had arrived in New York, my friend Hackett took me to the Randall's Island Rock Festival. An array of bands from Jimi Hendrix to Mountain took the stage and played with abandon. I wandered away for a break and was approached by a young American with a shaved head. He wore white robes, and I took him to be a strange sort of monk. With no explanation, he handed me a pamphlet and asked for a donation. I told him I had no money, and as we were talking, another man approached, a pusher wanting to sell me hashish. When I repeated that I couldn't pay for anything, the two of them got into a debate together and wandered off. The monk forgot to take his pamphlet, and without giving it a second glance, I slipped it into my little bag. The next day, at Hackett's home in Brooklyn, I got a telephone call from Gary, asking me to come to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, to our friend Frank's house. When I got there, I found Gary and Frank kneeling over a map stretched out on the living room carpet. "We're going to Europe in a few days," Gary told me. "You've got to come." I was completely broke and had plans to go back to Chicago as I had a job for the summer. But Frank assured me that he had enough money for the three of us. "All right," I said. "I'll go." All that remained was to explain my plans to my parents in Highland Park. No one in my family had ever ventured outside America. How would my protective mother and father react? I traveled back to my childhood home to find out. Sitting at the round glass-topped dining table, I stared down at the homemade dinner my mother had prepared. She would personally cook a feast for us every evening. Neatly arranged on my plate was succulent lasagna, crispy Italian bread lavished with buttery garlic sauce, and buttered artichoke hearts. The aroma of sautéed herbs and spices wafted across the room. "I've decided to go on a trip to Europe with Gary," I announced. Blank faces stared back at me across the table as I nervously shook extra salt and pepper over my food. "It will be an education, don't you think?" No reply. I looked around the kitchen at the flowered wallpaper and at the hot point stove and refrigerator, both pink, my mother's favorite color. "We'll learn so many lessons. Don't worry. I'll be back in September for college. We're leaving in 3 days." Silence. Mother looked as if she were receiving news of the death of a loved one. "Richie," she sobbed suddenly, "why do you have to do this? How will you eat? Where will you sleep?" She anxiously shook her head and pleaded in a tender voice, "You're just a boy. Who will protect you?" My father sighed. "My son, are you crazy? The world is a dangerous place. You are young and inexperienced. Anything could happen to you." Exhaling deeply, he added, "I'd forbid you if I thought you'd listen, but you won't." He stared, silently pleading for me to change my resolve. But I ignored him. His voice choked with emotion. He told me, "I will worry about you until the day you return." My little brother Larry exclaimed, "Cool, I wish I could go." But seeing the torment of our parents, he grew sober. "Richie, please, write sometimes."